And now for the latest news updates from around the world, let's cut across to New York, where my colleague Susan Teherani brings you the latest.
This broadcast on WION is coming to you live and direct from New York, United States.
Hi everyone, I'm Susan Teherani coming to you live from New York. We have a lot to cover, but we're going to start off in the Middle East with the trip of U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken to Israel, wading into the interactable conflict between Israel and Gaza. America has landed itself inside the region, intending to bolster a fragile ceasefire. The President of the United States, Joe Biden, has dispatched his top diplomat on a 4-day trip to West Asia. Following the American foreign policy playbook, Joe Biden intends to steer very clear of any long-term peace talks in the region. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived in the Israeli city of Tel Aviv just days after an Egyptian-brokered ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. Antony Blinken is the first high-ranking U.S. official to visit the region since Joe Biden assumed office. In tandem with Blinken's visit, the Israeli authorities allowed fuel, medicine, and food to enter into Gaza territories. The transfer happened for the first time since the 11-day cross-border hostilities. Blinken was welcomed by Israeli Foreign Minister Gabi Ashkenazi and other officials at the Ben Gurion International Airport and was then accompanied to Jerusalem. Antony,
of course. It's an honor and pleasure to have my friend, the Secretary of State, for his first official visit in Israel. I'm welcoming him on behalf of the government and the people of Israel.
Antony Blinken held talks with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in West Jerusalem. In a joint press conference with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the U.S. Secretary of State has vowed to, quote, rally international support to aid Gaza following a devastating war. Apart from declaring America's support to Israel again, Antony Blinken acknowledged that the recent truce doesn't address any of the underlying issues in the Israel-Palestine conflict.
The United States will work to rally international support around that effort while also making our own significant contributions, including some that I'll announce later today. We'll work with our partners closely with all to ensure that Hamas does not benefit from the reconstruction assistance. As President Biden has said, we believe that Palestinians and Israelis equally deserve to live safely and securely, to enjoy equal measures of freedom, opportunity, and democracy, to be treated with dignity.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Netanyahu hardly mentioned the Palestinians in his remarks. The Israeli Prime Minister spoke of building economic growth in the occupied West Bank, but warned of a very powerful response if Hamas breaks the ceasefire. In the joint press conference with America's Secretary of State, Netanyahu said that there will be no peace until the Palestinians recognize Israel as a Jewish state. The Palestinians have long objected to such language, saying that it undermines the right of Israel's own Palestinian minority.
We discussed also how to improve the lives and the conditions of the Palestinians, the humanitarian conditions in Gaza, including the question of the return of our MIAs and 2 civilians who were there, as well as building economic growth for Judea, Samaria, the West Bank, with international cooperation and participation. As for peace itself with the Palestinians, a formal peace, I think President Biden was absolutely correct when he said you're not going to get peace until Israel is recognized as an independent Jewish state, and that is the key.
Antony Blinken faces the same obstacles that have stifled a wider peace process for more than a decade, including an aggressive Israeli leadership, Palestinian divisions, and deeply rooted tensions surrounding the city of Jerusalem. Initially, the Biden administration has hoped to avoid being drawn into the conflict and focus on other foreign policy priorities. Before the violence broke out, this visit comes amid increased domestic pressure on Biden to hold Israel accountable for abuses against Palestinians. Criticism against American arms sales to the Israeli government is also mounting within the country. Since the ceasefire was reached on Thursday, the Biden administration has been touting its approach, claiming that Biden's behind-the-scene diplomacy helped cement the ceasefire deal. The U.S. president is under immense pressure to address the root causes of the conflict, such as the ongoing Israeli occupation and its 14-year-old blockade of Gaza. And a key question on America's intention is, what comes next? Does the Biden administration have any plan after the reconstruction phase?
My conversation with President Netanyahu, I commended him for the decision to bring the current hostilities to a close.
To discuss more on Antony Blinken's visit to West Asia, we have Emily Rose from I-24 joining us live from Tel Aviv. Hi, Emily. Welcome to WION. Let's start off with how U.S. Secretary Blinken's tour is being weighed where you are, considering the fact that it comes after the ceasefire and after, as we heard, he spoke about U.S. security commitments to Israel and strengthening opportunities for Palestinians in the same breath.
Yes, Susan, this is a very interesting look and a first look at how the American new Biden administration will approach the Middle East conflict. And for those who are watching, they also know that Biden, as you mentioned rightly earlier in the broadcast, is facing the court of public opinion back home. Domestic pressure. Well, so too with Netanyahu. And Channel 13, Hebrew media channel 13 on Sunday, released a poll saying that only about 35% of Israelis actually support this ceasefire. So he went into it knowing that perhaps he wasn't going to face too much support for ceasing fire. Some Israelis believe that the military operation should have gone on further to deal Hamas a harder blow. Some believe that it was too soon. But either way, he stood up there, and that was apparent in this very interesting interaction. What we did say, as you mentioned, there is always that balance between security, Israel's security, and affirming that Israel will maintain its security of its people. That's what Netanyahu needs to show, but also addressing that issue which has drawn global attention, which is the issue of reconstruction and development for Palestinians in Gaza. And if we look at what Hebrew media reported today, it is that when he mentioned that development that is meant to happen within the West Bank for Palestinians, Hebrew media is reporting that as part of the ceasefire deal, the exchange for that will be that the Palestinians agree to try to curb violence in the West Bank and acts of violence against Israel. So it could be that Israel is getting something in exchange for that, which is curbing those violent acts, terror acts, as it sees in the West Bank against Israelis, and perhaps even as well coming from the Gaza Strip.
Right. And, analysts and observers, some of them at least, say that Israel's dependence on the United States might be waning or even shrinking, and so is U.S. leverage. Do you think that was seen in today's engagement in any way?
Well, there's no doubt to me that it was a different tone than what we saw from the last administration. The last American administration obviously was very vocally an avid supporter of Israel. It made that very clear. And also as well, we didn't see in the last escalations during the Trump administration, we didn't see a lot of involvement in trying to broker ceasefire negotiations. So certainly this is a new chapter. It's a new page. In terms of the tone, we certainly saw Netanyahu attempt to really emphasize the fact that Biden had said, and this we heard this earlier in your broadcast, he quoted Biden as saying that there won't be peace for Israel and there won't be peace with Palestinians until they do recognize Israel as a Jewish state. So he did try to affirm that shoring of support from the American administration. It is, though, a different tone. We are seeing more hands-on involvement in these peace negotiations, something that we didn't see in negotiations in the past. And we'll have to see now what practical steps and what practical demands the Americans make on Israel in terms of the actual deals and bolts and nuts of this ceasefire agreement and how that plays out in the coming days.
Absolutely. And the coming weeks and coming months for sure regarding Biden's foreign policy in the Middle East. Thank you so much for joining us, Emily, here on WION. We'll talk to you hopefully shortly about the latest updates coming from this visit.
WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.